Why society has more toxic people than ever before. Anytime I see a ridiculous argument online, I find myself thinking on this one tweet. Twitter is the only place where well-articulated sentences still get misinterpreted. You can say, I like pancakes, and somebody's going to say, so you hate waffles then? No, that's a whole new sentence. What are you talking about? It's fascinating how accurately it captures modern social interactions down to all the silly things that drive tension. And there's no doubt about it. Life in the information age is aggressive. If you're not combat ready in some way, you're made to feel like you're a self-absorbed loser. People do not need extreme views to feel attacked. In a world where conflict is increasingly likened to identity, belonging precedes belief. Within this endless tension, we're at a point where we have to stop and wonder, why are we so defensive? Now, there's the obvious culprit in social media. It's powered by algorithms designed to be divisive and fueled by engagement. So, the math all checks out. But something interesting happens when we look beyond the online realm. There is still a palpable hair-raising tension in the air. Like at the grocery store. When someone's cart even slightly bumps into you, you look up and they're the one giving you a tense stare, like they weren't the ones who just breached your personal space. Or it's when you're driving and you signal to merge. The car in the next lane speeds up at the cost of seemingly nothing. It's like the whole world is living by an unspoken rule that says, yield nothing and claim everything. Deep down, every seemingly random outburst or itch to lash out comes from somewhere. We're all walking around with our emotional armor half on. We're pre-irritated before we even step out of the house. A headline, a notification on your phone, a memory. Everyone is upset about something. But today, bus rides aren't just quiet because people are tired. They're quiet because even eye contact feels like a potential skirmish. The deeper story isn't in how the news or social media is toxic. That's just a consequence of the first problem. It's a little controversial, but it reveals something that we've ignored for far too long as a species. Humans are tribal by default. Our us versus them dynamic dates back to the early forms of civilization. You trust your tribe, and you be wary of those who aren't your tribe. Belonging was more than just a feeling that you had, it was a fact, one that innately existed from the time you were born. Your identity came first, and your beliefs kind of followed afterwards. There wasn't a real concept of who do you want to be. You just kind of continued whatever your parents were already doing. For example, in early Scandinavian tribes, identity was quite literally woven into your name. Surnames often evolved as a direct declaration of a parent's lineage and profession. A name like Schmedson literally means son of the smith. Your self then was inherited. It was a preordained slot into the social structure. So today, those sentiments only seem to come up in fictional stories like Bridgerton. Back then, this practice cemented a strong sense of us, of belonging. Another example, imagine being an Arsenal fan, raised in a town of fellow Arsenal supporters. Now, it sounds like you've been born into a utopia or a cult, depending on who you ask. Yet, for better or for worse, this interconnectedness creates a strong sense of security. In many societies like these, there is a social blueprint mapping out your life. The question of individual ambition was irrelevant because identity was a collective heirloom. In such a world, us wasn't chosen. It was inscribed into the name that you answered to. This efficient system built a lot of loyalty, which in turn fostered cohesion. If you lived in an area with healthy soil, farming became the main practice for survival. Traditions, customs, and even religions grew around the regions that people found themselves in. This wiring would go on to exist for centuries. When adversaries appeared, it was usually just other tribes living across the river or over a hill. Obviously, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. This sense of cohesion did come at a brutal cost to any voice that broke out from the group. There were conflicts emerging from strict hierarchies and limited freedoms. Along the way, many lives have been lost challenging various practices that went on in the name of tradition. Think of the periods like the Salem witch trials and even the Crusades. Regardless of where we find ourselves, humans have always had this unique pull towards chaos that other species can't quite seem to recreate. Now, considering the factors that once helped civilizations thrive, there's a glaring contrast with today. And the problem, I would argue, isn't in our tribal instincts. It's the scale that we're operating within. Our ancient wiring didn't make it this far, expecting us to participate in the world that we have today. This global, hyper-connected world is, well, it's unprecedented. Not just in its existence, but in the speed in which it happened. We now carry our tribal brains around in a borderless digital arena. Them isn't just how we talk about the people across the river, they're now your mutuals and even your family members. Modern tribalism is very different for a long list of reasons. Chief among them is the parasocial nature of our groups. When you pay enough attention, you'll notice that consumption stands out as a determining factor. Fandoms, brand loyalty, cult-like figures, and there's no room for nuance or dialogue in those spaces. We often outsource our thinking to a figure that mirrors the ideas that we have surface-level knowledge on. By the way, like, comment, and subscribe. It could be a pastor, or a thought leader, a celebrity, or even a friend, maybe a YouTuber. That's right. Today, some friends don't seem to have any independent thoughts about anything. They just outsource their identity into another person that they admire. Yet, in that same dynamic, they're quick to fire signal flares of discontent when you cross seemingly insignificant lines. Saying something like, "Can you explain why you believe that?" is triggering more often than you expect, and that's alarming. On the right side of history, people just seem to regurgitate what a larger group decides is the truth. I have to say this, it's not that they're dumb or anything. No, far from it. As much as we don't like to admit it, we all have an element of this mindset within us. How can we not? These modern tribes offer identity without the demands of any real-world communities. That bond is tenuous and thin, sure, but it's still fiercely defended because for many, it's all they really have. And it's true that strong opinions garner strong reactions, but there are other ingredients seasoning the toxic sludge that we find ourselves in today. Most of us don't realize how much of our worldview is shaped by which news outlets that we read. Two people can follow the exact same story but see completely different headlines and walk away with entirely different emotional reactions and conclusions, even though the underlying facts are identical. This is why I use Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that's designed to make it easy to understand the bias in your news. They pull in thousands of articles every day and sort them by story, so you can immediately see how different outlets are covering the same event. Each story page includes political bias breakdowns that show you which sides of the divide are covering a story and how they're framing it. You also get factuality ratings, ownership information, and headline comparisons, all in one place. Take this recent story about Are You Dead? It's an app that recently went viral in China. You can follow along at ground.news/aperture. CNN, a left-leaning source, covered it as the viral app in China taps into national loneliness by asking, "Are you dead?" focusing on the loneliness epidemic, while Bangkok Post, a more right-leaning source, used this headline, "Are you dead? Chinese app for single living goes viral," focusing more on the single living aspect. The same exact story, but two completely different emotional tones and intended takeaways. Ground News makes that contrast immediately visible by showing every headline together. But even beyond that, there's another feature they have that I absolutely love, and that's the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are heavily covered by one side of the political spectrum, but barely mentioned by the other. If you only read news from either the right or the left, then you most likely miss this really important UN report from how AI could worsen the wealth gap. It was only covered by 15% of left-leaning sources and 14% of right-leaning sources, with over 70% of the reports coming from sources in the center. On this channel, we talk a lot about seeing the same thing from multiple points of view, and this blind spot feature is the perfect way to do just that. Ground News has genuinely helped me understand the media landscape with more clarity and less confusion. To get access to transparent media reporting, go to ground.news/aperture, click the first link in the video description, or scan the QR code on screen to subscribe today. You'll get 40% off their Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access to all of their features. Don't forget, that's ground.news/aperture, or the first link in the description. Subscribe today and help support a more transparent media landscape. Now back to our story. Globalization without psychological adaptation. On the news and in classrooms, globalization is a force powered by economics. I have oil. You have precious metals. Let's establish a line for trade. And sometimes it's a force for policy. Say a bunch of countries want to protect certain ideals in a vulnerable region. It helps to create a united front under one banner. But that's what globalization looks like on paper. For you and I, things aren't so academic. At the individual level, globalization is, above all else, a force of psychology. It's a relentless intimacy with the entire world's cultures and values. Everything happens at once, and your daily awareness spikes up to levels no human group has ever collectively anticipated. When you live in a melting pot of realities, context just collapses. Your world is no longer your local community and its shared assumptions. It's everyone on the whole planet, all at once. This is less about the impact of exposure to other people and more centered on competing frameworks for reality. This dizzying experience is deeply uncomfortable because no one expected it to be this much of a mess. Your moral compass on success, family, justice, and truth is constantly at odds with entirely different ones, not just as distant curiosities, but as actual options and opinions sharing the same digital space. Take a second to think about it. If your local culture is tuned towards excessive respect for people in senior positions, you'd probably thrive, but only in systems that promote those standards. When you leave that type of environment, adapting to a new one, personable culture can feel impossible. Let's look at North America. We have a culture that encourages boldness and strong individual identity. Coming from a place where conformity is a strength, you would quickly become the weakest person in the room. The problem isn't in the meeting of these two systems, but it's the speed and the scale at which this is happening to us. Now that life itself comes with a chronic state of evaluation, it's that much harder to know what's right and what's wrong. That's why extreme takes exist on one end, while lukewarm opinions thrive on another. When nuance is brought into conversations, it's like you're betraying a pre-written script of behavior. Consequently, modern environments inevitably exploit the tribal wiring that we all have. When overwhelmed, our brains are drawn to a sense of clarity. That's when we latch on to the simplest things and draw defensive lines, retreating into a tribe of rigid identity. In there, it feels safer than the confusion of endless ambiguity. And here's the real kicker with this. Our informational ecosystems turn human indifference into a feeling of perpetual threat. There's no shared platform to look towards for moderation, no central religion or code that we work with. And as we plant our feet deeper into this new constructed normal, the world adapts with us. Imagine living in a society where everyone is totally on the same page. Public life has a uniform identity and a singular narrative dominates. The state media and other forms of official discourse all seem to be united in their ideologies. As far as any outsider can tell, visible ideological clashes are rare and disagreements are far from the norm. This is the social reality that you'll find when observing China today. Now, while China's public image gives us the appearance of a utopia, their reality is a case study in engineered cohesion. With a population of over 1.4 billion, China looks like a ticking time bomb to anyone who understands the numbers game of countries with high populations. And from a bird's eye view, no government has a clue on what to do with so many people at once. However, this East Asian powerhouse seems to have figured something out. So, what is it? Is it their storied history, or is there something else? The most popular answer is actually China's deep cultural continuity. Their timeline tells a story of survival through highs and lows, and through it all, ethnic homogeneity only grew. Today, the Han Chinese constitute over 90% of China's population. These historical factors provide a foundation for where China currently finds itself compared to the rest of the world. However, the toxicity manages to endure in a different way. Instead of a loud, visible conflict, something else has taken root. The result here is that, to outside observers, China appears to have sidestepped the exhausting culture wars dominating much of the Western public sphere. Of course, you can see where this is going. The keyword here is appears. Deep within the chasm of China, a familiar searing heat exists. So how does the country handle it? Well, here's a few ways. Formal and informal social pressure, increased incentives for conformity, and a subordination of individual expression. Even suppressed societies have internal tribal fractures based on class, regions, and generations, but these aren't publicly visible. You know how when you're really good at sports, you get to decide which one you want to pursue professionally? If you're athletically gifted, great. The country picks what you'll represent them in, and be sure to promote good PR at every international event, or maybe you'll risk disappearing for a while. It's not that China is inherently evil and the West is good, no, perish the thought. Much like how Western freedom allows bad actors to thrive, Chinese suppression prevents a true sense of identity. There are a lot more horrific concerns that are suppressed due to an overwhelming majority in support of steering one ship. Therefore, China's presence here as a structural contrast demonstrates that the visible symptoms of a fragmented society can be suppressed through powerful social control. Compared to China, pluralistic societies like North America choose, explicitly or implicitly, to allow multiple competing tribes of varying degrees to coexist in that public square. They champion individual rights, and diversity is celebrated as a strength. Don't get me wrong. It is a beautiful way to appreciate the world. However, this noble choice does come with a duty to manage constant friction, the chaos, the debates, the constant culture wars. These aren't bugs in the system. They aren't something that we couldn't predict. They're an operational cost. There's a quote, "Men used to go to war." It's a rhetoric that often comes up when discussing negative behaviors from the male gender. Hearing it now it's kind of hilarious in a deeply sad way. Like, your value peaks at the idea that your entire existence is summed up in dying in a blaze of glory. Simultaneously, the "what do women bring to the table" question feels equally revealing and equally repelling. They reframe value as a transactional offering in a cultural marketplace that is never closed. The tragedy of our modern self-selected tribalism is that we've swapped our existential struggle for survival for a performative struggle for significance. When your identity is a chosen costume, any challenge to your beliefs feel like a threat to your very existence. It's why everyone goes from a 0 to 100 in a snap. War hasn't disappeared, it's just been internalized and democratized. Every comment section is a potential battlefield. Every family dinner is now a diplomatic summit. It's awful. Thanksgiving has never been like this. In this system, the ultimate casualty is you, your individual mind, and it's ironic. In the free world, we demand to put everyone but our chosen tribes in a box. The cost of pluralism is a private exhaustion of having to choose who you are and then defend that choice against a world of other choices. And it's not surprising that this is happening. Meaningful influence feels impossible to achieve nowadays. You don't have any power over the economy. If the government introduces a policy that sinks you below the poverty line, you just take it on the chin, champ. And the same goes with political systems. The majority of the world's population is dealing with significant levels of dissatisfaction with their leaders. While it was once hilarious to look at France's protests over the littlest of things, it now just feels extra justified when you really think about it. Leaders suck. Yet none of us feel powerful enough to make any real change happen. And you'd think people would proceed to disengage, but no, they're redirecting their need for agency into spaces that they can still touch. Personal relationships, immediate communities, online spaces are all affected by this. And if they're too weak to change the big picture, then, well, their beliefs evolve from being simple positions into tools of power. These tools are a primary driver for carving out territory in a world that is continuing to spin out of control. So here's how it works with identity. In the absence of clear social roles or a stable community, what you believe becomes who you are. Let's look at the manosphere, for example. I never get tired of poking fun at that. Where young men get initiated into a cult-like red pill community. Identity is tied to ideologies like this in a very parasitic way. In such communities, people are taught what to think about politics, culture, and social issues. And by absorbing these opinions, they're given a false sense of selfhood. And this pattern only applies to the planned mental hijacks. Unintentionally, the same thing is repeating itself as well. Consider the lifelong fan of a sci-fi universe like Star Wars. Over decades, their love for the franchise could lead to their primary framework for ethics and politics. It's natural to hang out with like-minded people, more so in a world where random strangers rarely find common ground on a topic. Slowly, fandoms and communities begin to grow a narrative on how things should be in real life. Consider the person whose brand loyalty affects their social circle. There are rules on what a Lululemon girl is supposed to look and act like. Thanks to social media, the existence of a special club of fellow Lululemon fans might emerge. Sometimes the brands themselves intensify and even divide. A community isn't just a preference anymore. As much as you might only like a brand of aesthetics, associating yourself with it involuntarily makes you a walking billboard. And brands know this, of course, and they take advantage of that constantly. The power to manipulate ideologies using dedication and nostalgia is extremely potent. As people become indistinguishable from their chosen tribes, defending anything or anyone's rights and wrongs unexpectedly becomes an act of defending yourself. The worst part of this is you'll probably give these brands the benefit of the doubt. It's as though the alarm bells of your mind are all out of battery for life's larger problems. Instead of critically thinking things through, you jump to protect the last piece of yourself as the world tries to shred it away. Have you noticed that within the midst of this toxicity, we've also seen a huge spike in hypocrisy? You can turn on the news, and the person promoting purity culture or nuclear families is the same one, constantly wrapped up in controversial affairs. People don't need to actually believe in the things they say anymore, and that's wild to me. The performance of correct belief always grants you status. If you identify with a religious group, it doesn't matter if your name appears on a list of close associates to a notorious pedophile. As long as you champion certain rhetorics, your life comes with belonging, respect, and influence within your chosen tribe. Agreement and dissent aren't what they seem to be on the surface. They're just transactions in a reputation economy. Nuances, only a liability. This mechanism fuels every single thing in our lives. The political is personal, not just because of policies that are, in fact, affecting our lives, but because a political allegiance is now a primary identity. Today, people keep track of whether or not celebrities have spoken up for a cause, and they hound them on that. It's fair to expect alignment from people we look up to. However, they should not be, and absolutely are not, our saviors. I shouldn't have to say this. A tweet from a Hollywood actor supporting a cause does not automatically make them a good person, and it does not make them a bad person. Exporting morality to an avatar thousands of miles away doesn't make you a good person either. We don't engage with grand philosophies anymore. Our ethics are tied to brands, movies, tweets, and posts. In these accessible battlefields, one can still feel powerful, but in the real world, change requires so much more than what we are willing to admit to ourselves. Virtue signaling is at its core a desperate and often toxic assertion, one that says, "My voice is a lever that moves something." No. In reality, the only thing that lever seems to move is other people's pain. Today, new generations are raised in a world where toxicity is more or less the standard. Modern discourse operates on a set of rules that replace a quest for truth with the performance of strength. Rewards go to those who project certainty and establish dominance. That's why debate culture now looks less like a chance for dialogue and more like a blood sport. You came there to watch someone get killed. And honestly, it has been like this for a while. During the peak of 2016, there was a pushback against social justice warriors. At the time, a trend came up where an outraged person would be ready to attack over any perceived slight. It was usually an angry woman with colored hair that was probably getting triggered over feminist debates. Her opponent was the anti-SJW, a smooth-talking guy whose entire identity was built on debunking and mocking the outraged woman. Both sides eventually learned the same brutal lesson. Aggression will always get attention. This is the curriculum. Young people didn't grow up witnessing this dynamic. They also took what they learned and became apprentices to it. Their first forays into public thought are happening on platforms where the loudest speakers are experts at clapbacks and owning the opposition. This influences younger generations to lead with their rhetorical guard up and pre-interpret every disagreement as a form of hostility. You can think of it like learning a language. If you grow up in a house where yelling is the primary mode of communication, you will probably get very fluent in yelling, and gradually you'll adopt the grammar. First, your mind starts to get familiar with the escalation, then personal insults become punctuation, and finally, strategic interruptions expand into your communication. All of these elements culminate in a twisted vocabulary. Our digital world is now running on that vocabulary. Like and share buttons have become a positive reinforcement. Meanwhile, the algorithm is a tutor promoting dramatic performances. One of the worst consequences of our new normal is the death of empathy. The thing with kindness is that it requires some level of vulnerability on your part. When everyone's guard is up, putting it down looks like you're admitting defeat. Rather than tearing down walls to end conflict, you're building them up with more armor than ever, because you don't want to lose. That's why every group seems committed to teaching harsher dogma and doubling down on these radical ideas, and all of this keeps happening until you're unable to recognize what you were even fighting for in the first place. And as we are building towards a crescendo in toxicity, we'll need to count our losses at some point, right? Although we are experts in the art of conflict, we've sacrificed a deeply human art of repair and resolution. Somehow, some way, we need to find that again. So, now that toxicity is normalized, where have all the reasonable people gone? First off, the retreat of saner minds is not something that happens passively. It has always been an active, weary choice. It's the corrosive effect of a hostile discourse. Reasonable minds didn't suddenly turn towards extremism. They mostly went into a self-appointed exile from everyone else. Back when Elon Musk suddenly took over Twitter and began making scathing changes, many prominent voices on the platform proceeded to announce their exits. Instead of standing to fight for their rights to a sane space, they just left. Reasonable people actually have the most to lose. In a battle of absolutes, the person with a nuanced view is also the same one with the largest surface area for attack. They're not bathed in the armor of ideological purity, so no side will overwhelmingly arrive at their defense. When a person is able to admit complexity or acknowledge multiple valid points on all sides, they quickly risk being dismantled. By declaring your love for both Apple and Android, you're seen as too weak to pick a side, a dirty fence sitter. Android purists might wonder why you'd ever claim to love them when Apple is such an adversarial brand. The same thing goes with pancakes and waffles, console wars, politics, and, well, honestly, anything at this point. The moderate is treated as the most dangerous heretic of all. In response, silence becomes a survival strategy and not necessarily apathy. The two often get confused, but choosing not to speak out is only an act of self-preservation. Unfortunately, self-preservation is still a kind of dissent that people are unwilling to accept. Their arguments seem extremely justified, especially when lives are at stake. However, the emotional vortex of helping plays out as counterintuitive. The loudest voices aren't actually contributing all that much. They are mostly heard policing everyone else for not fixing the issues either. For the more grounded types, explaining yourself it's not worth the cost. This isn't giving up on the truth, it's just a rational retreat in a battlefield that never moves anything forward. When all is said and done, the victors and losers essentially get a game over screen. When the next reason for an argument pops up, everyone assumes their roles and proceeds to rinse and repeat. Right now, it feels like more people are choosing to opt out of participating with any stakes in society. It's been labeled as the Great Exhaustion. In the workplace or family gatherings, there are those who are actively self-censoring for even the simplest of topics. They do this because they've learned that sharing anything remotely real invites a draining, no-win morass of a debate that fractures cherished relationships. This mass opt-out creates an illusion that toxicity is the most dominant way people interact in the public square. It's not dominant because people want it that way. I think most people would say that they don't want a toxic world. But it is dominant because it's uncontested. The loudest echoes are deafening because everyone else has abandoned the circus. So of course polarization has taken root and society has been split into two equal raging halves. We've become a society where the loudest edges perform a fight for a tired, silent majority that doesn't believe in the performance anymore. In a stable society, there are surefire milestones you hit and celebrate. Education, career, home, family. These metrics are a sequence that is drilled into everyone during their formative years. Historically, they've meant respect and a sense of forward motion. Today, the milestone ladder feels so increasingly out of reach. Its steps are splintered with dire economic conditions, soaring costs of living, and every other systemic issue that has gone on unaddressed. If you're still following the traditional playbook to success, you're walking a tightrope soaring over a dark, yawning abyss. And I know I'm not just speaking for myself on this one, but this reality is really difficult to accept. There's a natural human need for progress and a sense of respect. That need doesn't disappear fully. This creates a unique pressure where people feel stuck and they can't withdraw. When you can't climb that material ladder, you begin to fight for a position on a symbolic ladder. Any ladder will do. Performance in the social arena is your only source then of validation. Some choose to live vicariously through public figures. Parasocial relationships are more prominent now than ever before. Take it from the Cambridge Dictionary, and their word of the year for 2025 was parasocial. Meanwhile, we've outsourced our thinking to AI. We've outsourced living to some other individual that represents our ideal self. When you're perpetually observed and exposed to everyone else's life, you feel eyes on you at every turn. Social media delivers a 24/7 highlight reel of everyone's highly curated lives, deepening your confusion and leaving you wondering how you're so behind in comparison to these other people. All this happens and there's no clear path forward. The result is a complex anxiety that simmers without any outlet in sight. That's why the currency of conflict is so potent to embrace. Cancel culture has been a hot topic for a while now, and its popularity is down to one problem: a lack of nuance. People are absolute in the eyes of the crowd. Mob mentality reigns. If you ever posted something thoughtless or outdated, your current self is fully judged on those actions, no matter how long ago you said those things that you said. One mistaken bad judgment becomes all that you're worth. It's immortalized in the form of a screenshot or an archive, ready to be weaponized as evidence of an irredeemable character. There's no statute of limitations on error. The court of public opinion shines the spotlight on your life, and its judgments are final. Behind the curtains, hypocrites convene to cover up the wrongs of those who are aligned, especially prominent voices to a cause. Their past is quietly reframed. Their missteps are framed as growth or taken out of context. The reason why this happens isn't because they're blind to the irony, no. In fact, they are hyper-aware of what's going on, but alignment to the cause strikes as the greatest good in existence. The good guys aren't good because they're educating anyone to be better, they're good because they get to vanquish anyone who denies their gospel. It's a lot like religious inquisitors that were once able to brand skeptics as heretics. The church covers up dodgy priests and executes the unbelievers. Whatever banner they fly under, the truth is that humans have an unwavering tendency to gravitate towards selfish behavior. When morality becomes a billboard, practicing anything you preach ceases to matter. The result is a society that has forgotten how to redeem. We've lost the social script that says, you did a bad thing, but you're not a bad person. Atone and learn from your actions. In its place, we have a permanent ledger of sin and a tribe-based pardon system. The death of forgiveness doesn't mean we suddenly became harsher. We just don't believe in anything enough to abide by shared human contracts. A less toxic society is not a peaceful one. Let's get that clear. What we should strive towards is resilience. The first step towards progress is to discard our fantasy of a future without conflict. Toxicity will never truly disappear because the conditions that create it are now core features of our world and not bugs in the system. To imagine otherwise is a quick road to disappointment. We need to accept that friction is the non-negotiable cost of pluralism. Choosing a society that protects diverse beliefs, identities, and freedoms is choosing one that comes with constant negotiation. That means we need to reframe our issue. You see, the core problem of our time is not an increase in disagreement itself, it's our collapsing ability to coexist with it. We've forgotten how to share a space with ideas that we dislike or disagree with, how to hold convictions without needing to destroy those of who oppose us. Every adversary to your ideals can't be a raging caricature of foolishness. Surely, there are regular humans just like you that are out there. The infrastructure for coexistence has faded, but we can rebuild. This leads to the most important question of all. In a world structured for conflict, what kind of person endures without becoming cruel? It's not the person who wins every argument, neither is it the one with an unshakable certainty. It's someone else. It's the person who learns when to disengage from a battle designed to never have a victor, only casualties. The same person who practices the discipline of emotional restraint. That trait is rare, but it is teachable. If we can make conscious efforts to de-escalate and listen past the insults, we can preserve the parts of ourselves that conflict is always seeking to burn away. Restraint is a lonely feeling next to the loud, unfiltered world. You'll likely go uncelebrated for maintaining your humanity in this system. The project is no longer to change the world into something harmless. It's to become a person who can navigate a harmful world without adding to the harm. The less toxic society begins not with a changed algorithm or a great big argument. It starts with the same choice, repeated by enough individuals to bear the weight of friction without lashing out against its effects.